Every successful person got there by going through tough times. Success is a hard-ass teacher who likes to knock you around along that journey. You know, it takes real guts to not give up and keep going. We'll hear stories about failures and how these leaders flip the script to create success. I'm Jon Schultz. Join me and let's discover how success is never really overnight. So welcome to my second episode of the Upset Podcast. I'm so happy to be here with Stratis Morfogen, who is a good friend of mine, and I'm looking forward to having a great conversation. Stratis is the owner of Brooklyn Chophouse and Brooklyn Dumpling Shop. He comes from a family of restaurateurs, and he is an awesome one himself. He's the author of the book, Damn Good Dumplings, and as I know, they are unbelievable, and I can't get enough of them, and he's been named Entrepreneur of the Year. Stratis is an all-around good guy, and thank you so much for being a part of the podcast, Stratis.
Well, thank you for having me, Jonathan.
Yes,
and really excited.
Good, thanks. So listen, obviously I know you. I like the guests to get to know you a bit, and you know we're going to get into a lot of interesting conversation here. But take me back, like your family was in restaurants. Like, how did you get excited to be in this industry? Because you've been in it for such a long time. What was the root of how you got started in it?
Well, it's three generations. So the Morfogens came in the mid-1800s. And when my grandfather started his path onto being a restaurateur, he was doing, he was an immigrant from Greece. He got here in the late 1890s. His father got here earlier. And, he started delivering vegetables and working as a dishwasher and a busboy. And finally, he raised enough money with his brothers, and they opened a restaurant called Pappas. And Pappas was on West 14th Street and became a huge success. It was a truth to the American ethos, the American dream, and what America stood for, and hopefully today stands for, but that's another conversation. So in 1910, they opened up Pappas, and Pappas had a 65-year run. And through that time, my father learned the business and opened his restaurant in 1956. He opened up all the Chelsea Chophouses. Make a very long story shorter. He had 14 restaurants in his career, 5 being the Chelsea Chophouses. And, I grew up, this is like, an industry and a business that I've learned from the womb. And I've been doing it and always excited about it. A little story when my dad sent the trip for my mom and my brother and sister to go to Disney World. I was around 7 years old and I realized that my father's driving the truck that week. And I said, no, I don't want to go to Disney World. I want to go to Fulton Fish Market with you. And he's like, what? You don't want to go to Disney World? I'm like, no, I want to go to the Fulton Fish Market. I love the energy. I didn't say energy, but I love it down there. I want to go down there because the energy was alluring to me and addictive. And I never stopped going there. And that's what it was. It's just in my blood. It's the only thing I know how to do.
So with your father and family being so successful in the restaurant business, was it always that way? Everything looks like a pretty picture until you find out, what's behind it. So what were some of the challenges you saw as a younger person that, helped you be what you are today?
No, it was never a check mark. And if anyone tells you it's a check mark, they're really not in the restaurant industry. And I don't know if they're in any industry. It's never a check mark. The path to success looks like this. There's no such thing as a straight up arrow. And if there is a straight up arrow, that means you haven't pushed yourself far enough or really maximized your potential. I remember in the 70s, my dad was super successful. He was a spokesperson for American Express. Everything was going great. And then there was a fish crisis in the late 70s at the last years of Carter. And I remember that the restaurant took a huge hit. Like, people were started saying there's iodine in fish and da-da-da. My dad's restaurants were all chopped fish houses. They're like, I would consider them to what today looks like the Palm, just as much lobster and fish as steak. And, he took a huge hit, and then the diners started to explode. So he started converting a few of his chop houses to the classic Greek diner. So there's always a pivot, and you always got to stay ahead of the trend. And if you're not going to be ahead of it, at least be, in sync with it, because that's really key to success in this industry, because things change so quickly. And going way fast forward, we did that with Brooklyn Dumpling Shop even before COVID, embracing technology. And, and that's part of our industry. You have to move quick and you have to embrace technology. And unfortunately, our industry has always failed at keeping technology at the forefront.
And it's interesting because they say, most businesses only last 3 to 5 years plus, right? And especially in a competitive landscape as the restaurant business, it's even worse. So, what I love is that, you watched someone close to you succeed and fail and pivot. And if there was one trait that you felt has stuck with you during all those years of learning through where you are today, what would you say it is? Like for me, my father was a stickler for being on time. It annoyed the hell out of me because I was always like, well, we'll get there. We'll be there. It's like I felt pressured all the time on being places on time. And now I see the value of that. Like all we have is our time. So what was something that you felt stuck with you?
My dad was a true deal maker, not like his father. My grandfather was not, but my grand uncle Paul, he was a deal maker. And everybody in the family, we have a very large family. If you ever heard the name Morfogen, trust me, we're related. I have 61st cousins. But the point of that is that when Paul, he was the one that came in and did the deals. My father was the deal maker. His brothers were not. And I'm the same way. And something that always, that he instilled in me was luck happens to those who work hard. And it took me about 25 years to figure out that was Abraham Lincoln and not my father. That was his quote. But luck happens to those who work hard. Because if you think you're going to be lucky sitting on a couch, well, guess what? The odds of that happening is I think you have a better chance at winning lotto. And then the second quote that I've always grew up on is luck happens when opportunity meets preparation. Because even when you do get lucky, if you're not ready, if you're not prepared, that luck's just going to go right by the wayside. So my father had an incredible work ethic. And he basically showed me that hard work is the only way to get it. When I wanted to get my stereo or my drum set, I said, Dad, give me $1,000. And he's like, no, go work extra shifts at the restaurant as a busboy and buy it yourself. And I'm like, what do you mean? Why? I mean, you have a lot of money. Why can't you just buy it for me? He's like, no. And the same way when I used to mop the floors in the bathrooms of Chelsea House, he would say to me, I go, Dad, you own the restaurant. Why am I mopping floors? Why am I doing this? And here I am like 9, 10 years old. I don't know if that you'd get away with that today in today's world. But he used to say to me, if you're going to love this business and you're going to stay in this business, you're going to have to teach someone one day how to mop a floor. And unfortunately, you can't read it out of a book. And these are some of the things that I grew up with, and I continue, and I will do with my children as well. That these are very important points to get across. I do believe in theory. I do believe in education, but it's really about 1/10 of what you need to succeed, especially in our industry.
Well, and what's so interesting about you, because obviously we have lots of conversations, like you did every job. You did clean the floor. You did wash the dishes. You saw your father do it. Like you were led by example. And thank God you had an amazing example because, in any business, if you don't really get to the detail of how the business operates, and you're not going to be good at all of it, right? I mean, at the end of the day, you said you're a deal maker, right? So maybe operations is something that you know how to do and you experience because you saw it and you've worked on it, but you also got to know what you're good at but you got to know it all, right? Do you agree with that or?
I do. I do know it all and I know where my strengths are. So every time I do a new restaurant, I always have somebody that's watching the bottom line. Even though I know food costs, I know payroll costs, I know operational costs, but you don't want my energy focused there. You want it 100% on top line, creativity, conceptual, press. Press has been very good to me for 40 years now, 38 years. And that's where you want me focused on. And I have found true success. Here's another real business point that's important that your viewers learn or understand is that when I owned 100% of everything, I usually failed. I had a much higher failure rate than owning 30%, 25%, 40% with a great team that was smarter than me in those respected areas. I'm batting, knock on wood, I'm trying to find wood here, at a very, very high number, double of what the industry calls out for success. But before that, when I owned 100% of everything in my 20s and 30s, my failure rate was like 40%. And that's too high for me. And I realized that, it's better to build a great team, take a small piece, and build something special. And yeah, that's my drug, building something from nothing.
And it's interesting you say that. I mean, most companies that we look at in awe today, they always had, a team, co-founders, people that were good at some things, not as good at others. And the energy of the team worked. And, I think that that's a major part of success. So I completely agree with you. So here we are, you had all this amazing education growing up as a kid. You had a great family, a hardworking family, creative family, right? With all these restaurant concepts. And then you have this opportunity to start your own concession business. So tell us sort of like how you felt good enough to actually start something on your own, right? Because obviously it's not working for a company, it's taking that risk. And sort of what happened through that as a venture, as an owner operator.
Well, people always laugh and they say my name is perfect for me because it starts with more, and even as a kid, when I was in high school, I would be working. The first day I had a weekend off from 7 years old to 18 years old was my prom. I worked every weekend. Don't get me wrong, I went out after, but I went out at midnight after the restaurant was closing. So through that time, I got pretty bored. I was working as a waiter, a bartender, a manager. I was even booking weddings at my dad's catering hall, South Shore Manor out in Oakdale. So I had the opportunity to take a concession stand in Medford, Long Island, and it was called Party Palace Restaurant. And it was one of those traditional Nathan's restaurants. And I needed $35,000 to do it. It was doing about $7,000 a week in sales, birthday parties, clowns and stilts and it was inside a big game room. And with that said, my dad gave me the loan. And what I saw right away was something different. I saw this big party room and I said, we're doing a team disco. We'll do these birthday parties on Saturday and Sunday in the afternoon, but we're going to have, battle of the bands and a DJ, and we're going to make this into a team night on Friday and Saturday. And so, Jonathan, I took a business that I paid $30,000 for, $35,000 with the opening costs, and it was doing $7,000 a week. And then all of a sudden, with the two team nights, it was $20 admission, unlimited pizza and soda, and this is like 1987. And all of a sudden, I'm doing $35,000 and $40,000 a week. I paid my dad back in like 3 months, and then that was it for me about being an entrepreneur. Here, I took something that you could have just stayed there at $7,000 a week, make $800 a week, and be happy, and have it run by itself. And I could continue working with my dad's restaurant if I wanted to, and have this as like an annuity. But I'm like, hell no! I saw an opportunity. Let's blow this thing up as a team disco. And it's also, how great is a team disco? You got bands, music, hot dogs, pizza, soda, and then you have a game room, all under one building. It was just, to me, it was just such an obvious. And that's when the first taste of money came in. And, you come up with a concept and you make money doing it, more money than you ever dreamt of. And that was my hook into being an entrepreneur, and it never stopped. And that was when I was 19 years old. So
how long did this business last? Because, going back to your 100% partner.
It went for about 4 years, and I sold it at 6X because my dad at that point bought the Hilltop Diner in Flushing. And my dad was like, hey, let's get back to business together, but this time you're going to be my partner. I said, as long as I'm not a waiter or a bartender and I'm your partner, I'm very interested in doing Hilltop Diner. But we're going to do it under my concept. He's like, what do you mean? I said, I don't believe the Greek diner can sustain. And I said, what I want to do is I want to get a really good chef just to do pasta, fish, and vegetables. And then you could have your sandwiches and your eggs. But I want pasta, fish, and vegetables to be handled a certain way. I want it to be held with a really renowned, a great chef with a great, history in fine dining. But we're going to put it in a diner setting. So Daily News Magazine put us on the cover because fast forward, I hired Gabrielle Moran, who had 3 stars with the New York Times at a restaurant called Van Dam. And I made him the chef of those items. He was co-chef. The other chef was doing the traditional Greek stuff. And we were basically focused on those 3 things. And it became the only diner in history to have you need a reservation only for Friday and Saturday. And it was featured in the New York Times. It was featured in Daily News Magazine front cover in 89, I think it was, or 90 around there, 91. And it said, look at these two generations fighting over what a diner should be. And my father's quote in there is, well, I told my son, he's not going to be a spokesman for the diner industry. And then I said to my father was, well, you're not going to keep me. And then my father says, well, for me to keep him, he won that argument. I needed to conform or I was going to lose him again. And I wanted him to be with me. Typical Greek thing, don't leave the family. So we did that until 1993. And in 1993, Gabrielle and I opened up Gotham Diner in Manhattan. Now, here's my first taste of Manhattan. And it was gangbusters. I mean, we just, we did a stainless steel diner on the corner of 81st and 2nd Avenue. And we had a nice long run there. And basically from there, I opened up Rouge nightclub. I opened up 3 nightclubs in my career. And I'd say about 30 restaurants from that day, from 1987 to present day.
All right, so that all sounds good, right? One of them was Phillipe Chow, right? I don't know what year was that restaurant started?
So I'll tell you how Phillipe was created. I used to go to Mr. Chow. My wife was an editor at Vogue magazine. I had friends that would take me there. The only Chinese I knew prior to that was growing up in Garden City was the Chinese corner takeout one with the metal wire rim. And there I was eating Chinese out of a paper carton. And I never knew that Chinese can be this good and this fancy, but I hated the customer service. I hated the guest experience because every time I wasn't with, the Vogue girls and the celebrities that hang out with them, I was treated like not so well. And one day I asked the manager for a menu and he refused to give me a menu. And all I was doing is I wanted to show my friends from Greece that look at this Chinese with like a formal menu and tablecloth and this and that. I was so enamored by the whole concept. But then when the manager said to me, next time you ask me for a menu, I'm not going to have the table ready for you. I was outraged because this is not hospitality. Then I asked him to itemize the bill and he said he wouldn't do it. I said, well, Brian, I'll tell you, I'm here twice, 3 times a month. I order the same thing and the prices are always different. And that's how they did it. So I got so angry. I gave my business card to the busboy and I said, give it to the chef, not thinking nothing was going to happen from it. But the next morning I got a call from Chef Phillipe Chow, and he said, hey, I got your card. What do you want? And this is a fun story because this is a great business story. So we sat down at Beyond Diner and had coffee. I said, listen, I'm offering you a partnership. I want you to be my chef. I love your food. I just hate the front of your house. And he goes, I'm here 25 years of Mr. Chow. I've been offered everything. What are you offering so different? I said, well, I'll give you 10% equity from day one. No buy-in, no nothing, no sweat equity. I'll give you 20% above your W-2. Yeah, we have a deal? He says, no. He goes, I've been offered that and better 100 times, especially in the last 7 years when I've been executive chef. And he started from the bottom up in that business. So as he's walking out the diner, I said, come back. I have one more offer. He goes, what is it? I said, what do we do this? I'll give you everything I just said, but we're going to go down to Roslyn Porsche and you're going to pick out a brand new Porsche and that's going to be a signing bonus. He goes, excuse me? He goes, yes, I'm going to buy you a brand new car for you and your family to enjoy because I'm pushing him to a Cayenne here. I don't want any Turbo Carreras going out that door. So I'm going to get you a nice family car because he's got 2 kids. And he goes, you show me a Porsche and I'm going to show you that we're partners. I said, great. So we got in the car, went down to Roslyn Porsche. He picked out a Cayenne. The $700 lease is what created Phillipe Chow into a $100 million company. And if it wasn't for that $700 lease, Phillipe Chow would never have been created and never have been fulfilled. But it wasn't the 10% equity or the 20% above his W-2. The man was making 70 grand a year, and now he's making 500,000 a year. And for that 500,000, he's not realizing that it only cost him $700 in a car lease to make that fantasy into a reality. And it's one of my favorite business stories is that when you give something to someone and you give it and it's tangible, it sounds better than equity that they feel like they'll never see. But as he's making $30, $40, $50,000 a month in profits, I used to have fun with the $731 for my lease. I used to put that in parentheses, 731 loss. But here's your 44,000 for the month. Here's your 37,000 for the month. Here's your 51,000 for the month. And it's that $730 that made that a reality.
Well, I also think you were creative, right? I mean, at the end of the day, it's an incredible story because you did. I do believe tangible things matter to people, because at the beginning of any entrepreneurial business, it's zero. I mean, like it's all just, hope and pray at that point. Yeah, it's hype. So that's amazing. All right. So he's in, which is awesome, right? You had a long run with that. And sort of, why don't you tell the audience sort of how maybe that story transformed you into this business, but how it sort of turned out, and maybe the next story, which is how you have to deal with challenges in a way that still catapults you to your next thing, and that, life is teaching you lessons all the time, basically.
Yeah, so I really never discussed this because it brought me into a very dark area. I'm going to discuss it with you because you are my friend. And this is a subject that brings me into a very dark period of my life. And what happened was, from 2005 to 2014, I was living the Gatsby life. I mean, we were making a ton of money. Business was great. And what happened at that point, the two founding, my co-founders, which really never had anything to do with the concept. One was a bookkeeper, and one was this guy that Phillipe brought with them. And they had a smaller percentage than me, but they wanted to be bought out. And the only reason why I agreed to it was, one was fighting a tumor in his brain. He had a brain tumor, and I was not on the best terms with them, but they were still my founding partners. And you know what? I wanted to see them do okay. And these guys from Credit Suisse came in. They had just left Credit Suisse, and they wanted to get into hospitality. And they threw a lot of millions of dollars at my partners. But the caveat was I had to stay on. And at that point, I agreed to it only because I knew my partner was sick, and it was nice to see them all invest about $300,000 and make $9 million and $7 million respectively. But I had to stay on with these guys, which I did not really trust, and that was my big mistake. And even my wife was saying, "Take the money and run, get out." But they wouldn't have done the deal because they wanted to pick my brain, because they knew that Phillipe Chow was stuck to my hip. The biggest problem is my lawyers really screwed up. At the closing, I should have been removed from all personal exposure, because what happened was when we opened up a restaurant like in Miami or Los Angeles, we all signed personal guarantees. It was something that you do, we're like three partners, we sign personal and we're good. We limit the exposure, but we're personally guaranteed on that exposure. So what happened when they got bought out, I was still listed on PGs for businesses that were basically marginally successful or ones that were failing. And what happened with these guys, they did almost like the producers. And how they did it, Jonathan, was really cruel. And it was borderline, I think, criminal. And I think laws should be changed based on this study. Is that they stopped paying vendors that I had PGs on. They closed restaurants that were marginally successful, wiping out investors' equity. And they did this on purpose to get me out of here. Because when it came time to buy me out, we had just beat the Mr. Chow case, because Mr. Chow was suing us for taking his chef. And it was a 48-count, $24 million lawsuit that we won in federal court. What happened at that point is my equity now all of a sudden, since my partners were bought out, which was about 2 years spread, became much more valuable than what my partners were bought out for. But they played a game with me, and they said, "Here's $1 million, go away." I said, "Excuse me?" And they said, "Here's $1 million, go away." I said, "No, my equity here is about 14, because you paid my partners 9, so I'm 14, and the company looks better than ever. And there's no litigation. There's nothing over our head." What they did, Jonathan, which I've never heard of at an 800 credit score, is they put me into involuntary bankruptcy by bankrupting every business and every place I signed a PG with my two partners. The two partners were already out, and they were living in the Bahamas, living the life of Riley. I was still there, and my lawyer never got me off those PGs or indemnified me off those PGs. These guys got together with a couple of creditors, and they basically forced me into involuntary bankruptcy, which I had never heard of. When I went in front of the trustee, it had like the landlord for Phillipe Miami, the landlord for Los Angeles, that they just closed on purpose. Well, Miami, in all fairness, closed because of the Gansevoort got foreclosed, and coincidentally, it got foreclosed by Credit Suisse. So it was really something that you could write a book about.
So let me ask you, okay, so here you are, now you're in this weird space where you got to fight yourself through, and it ends, right? And then what happened, right? It ends, and here you are, this whole life's work where you were, doing what you're doing and making things happen.
Well, they won the first battle of this war. That was 2014. They had bought my shares for $250,000 from the trustee, and I was out. I almost did like a Tina Turner. I said, you know what? I'm out. I don't want it. I even had very wealthy investors come to me and say, hey, come get a check. Go buy your equity back. I said, no, because you'll still be a minority shareholder with these crooks. And I don't want to put you in that position. So everything was said and done. And the craziest part of this, Jonathan, with the 253 sale to the trustee, I had a 3-year non-compete, which was like, what? You mean I can't open a restaurant? No, because they were so worried about me. That was part of the deal, was that they were going to pay 253, but I couldn't open a restaurant for 3 years. So you know what? There's a silver lining. I spent 3 years with my kids, and I started drafting my next move. And my next move is I'm going to bring back my dad's Chelsea House font from 1950, because that's going to bring me good luck. And what I mean by that is that because he had just passed, I'm going to do a Chophouse of my version of a Chophouse. And what I mean by that is when I went to my Chinese chef at Phillipe, because he left and came with me when I opened Brooklyn Chophouse, I said to Chef Mai, I said, when you think of Chophouse, what do you think of? And he says, chop suey, chopsticks. The chopper is a respected position in the kitchen. And I said, interesting. When I think of Chophouse, I think lamb chop, pork chop. And I said, you know what? There's something here, because every time I go to a Peter Luger or a steakhouse, which I love, my wife doesn't eat beef. So I would be there with a big porterhouse, and she's there with cream of spinach, baked potato, and a shrimp cocktail. And believe me, I love those restaurants, but we didn't need another one. So I came up with the concept of LSD. And what I mean by that is salt and pepper, ginger garlic, Chinese style lobster, married with a Pat LaFrida 35-day dry aged porterhouse, and married with a 7-pound authentic Peking duck, lobster, steak, and duck. And that's going to be my Chophouse. And then when it got down to the dumplings, I said, you know what? We're not going to do pork, shrimp, crab, and lobster. We're going to do pastrami, Reuben, bacon cheeseburger, Philly cheesesteak, and lamb gyro, and the Reuben. And we're going to do those kind of dumplings. I mean, it gets down to the soup. I don't want to do lobster bisque or French onion soup. I want to do French onion soup dumplings. And then all of a sudden, this thing started to take form.
So what pulled you out of this thing though? Because again, now this sounds like another great story, right? But what pulled you out of it? What got?
You know what? It's funny. My subconscious is trying to avoid it, but it's a great question. My kids got me out of it because they looked at me every day and they depended on me. But I will tell you, and I've never repeated this to anyone, is that I was in full depression. I'm a very happy guy. I lost everything. And I never thought that anybody would look at that age. I was 44. And even I took a shot and I went to a headhunter and I started seeing what they would offer me in the hospitality industry working for someone else, which I had never done. The only person I ever worked for was my dad, and that was 8, and that stopped at 18 and 17 years old. And all of a sudden I couldn't do it. I couldn't work for someone else. I even went on an interview and I'm like, what am I doing here? This is not me. I'm an entrepreneur to the bone. And then, I basically fell into a deep depression. And that's shocking to me because anyone that knows me knows how happy and how optimistic and positive I am. But I had lost everything. And I put such hell on my wife and kids. I had to fight my house from being foreclosed. I mean, all hell broke loose and there's nothing, I didn't make a wrong move except allowing an assignment for me to deserve all this. The corrupt, most disgusting human beings ever. And I allowed them into my world, and my lawyers unfortunately didn't protect me. But I learned a lot from it because it's never going to happen again because that pain is so real. And every time I go back to that 2014 to 2017, thank God, we had help from our in-laws and parents and all that. And I couldn't believe at 44 years old, this is what I've come down to. And I didn't think I could rebound from it. But guess what? I looked at my kids every day and I said, you know what? Entrepreneurship comes so natural to me. And that's when Robert Cummins came calling. He said, hey, I want you to come see this restaurant, what we're doing. Robert was a legend in the music industry. And he also, after Napster, he got a little nervous too. And he took all his music money and started opening IHOPs, Checkers, and Popeyes in Brooklyn, and did really well with restaurants and continues to do really well with those brands. He owns all the IHOPs in Brooklyn. And he comes, I want you to come see this restaurant with me in FIDA. And I got to tell you, Jonathan, I looked at him and I said, I can't. Because that time I was living in Bed-Stuy. We had just moved to a brownstone in Bed-Stuy after we had to sell our home on Fifth Avenue because we had no more money left. We had to downsize everything. And he goes, come on, man, jump in. And I don't know why I did it, but I tried to make every excuse not to come with him. And the best thing that ever happened to me is I got in that car and he went to show me this space right over the Brooklyn Bridge in Manhattan and said, look at this space. I'm thinking about doing a Caribbean restaurant. I need your opinion because you're a legend, man. You're this, you're that. I need you to be involved and help me here. I said, I don't see Caribbean restaurant, but I do see Chophouse. And he goes, another steakhouse? I don't see that. I said, I see Brooklyn Chophouse because you're right next to the Brooklyn Bridge. He's like, wow. And all of a sudden his eyes lit up. That's some name, Brooklyn Chophouse. Wait a second, we're onto something here. I go, let's go to cheapdomain.com and see if Brooklyn Chophouse is even available. BrooklynChophouse.com, available. Let's go to Google. Is there even a Brooklyn Chophouse? No sign of it. I go, that's your brand, Brooklyn Chophouse. And make a long story short, I give him a lot of credit because all the kitchen was being installed that day for a Caribbean restaurant. He went and told everybody to stop. And he actually, make a long story, he sent everything back, paid all the shelving fees. And he goes, keep telling me more. I said, it's like Phillipe Chow and Peter Luger had a baby. And they came out with a pastrami dumpling.
I love that.
What?
And what's so interesting, none of this is linear. I mean, but you had to get up and actually go out and be with someone in order to have that energy to recreate what you created, which is just tremendous.
I mean, it's called sliding doors, right? Because I really did not want to get in the car with him. He came to my house and like, jump in. I said, I'm sitting there on the stoop and I have zero energy. Like, you know, I've just been beaten down to a point where I've never thought I could go this low. You know, I had zero money coming in. I wasn't really worthy to the industry. I wasn't being offered partnerships or deals. And the worst part is I couldn't even open a restaurant on my own because I had a non-compete from the crooks that stole my company.
Yeah, but listen, you said at the beginning, like you'd rather own a piece of something with a good partner than all of it yourself. So actually that non-compete, as much as it wasn't something you wanted, it created where you are today. So I want to move this forward. So here you are, you pull yourself out of the depths of what you're calling hell, right? You don't even know how you did it, but you did it. And you believed in yourself enough to keep going. And here you have this great success. I mean, it's an unbelievable restaurant. I know you're opening up a new one in Times Square. I can't wait to see that. And then you're creating a new thing now called Brooklyn Dumpling Shop. So, I mean, and honestly, it's an unbelievable concept. And it's during the pandemic. And it's like when everyone would think you can't do that, you're doing it. So first of all, how did Brooklyn Dumpling Shops come together? And, you know, how did you get through it? And
well, just to recap the previous thing that I was saying about the hell that I was in, that's a great way of explaining it, is that I look back at everything now, and guess what, Jonathan? I wouldn't change a thing. But during that time, I was thinking thoughts that I never ever thought would ever enter my brain. And I will tell you that looking back at it now, I wouldn't change a thing, because the education that I learned from such a deep failure that I have never been accustomed to, even with my father, myself, I worked my ass off. I was honest. I did everything right. And I found myself in hell, exactly what you said. And I got to tell you, being partners with Robert Cummings and then David Thomas joined us was the greatest thing that happened to my career, because I'm with such two honest guys that if I leave $1 in the register, I find $1.10 the next day. You know, that's the type of partners awesome. I have. And what happened from there is Brooklyn Chophouse opened. It opened in October 2018 to a big success. And I guess the best revenge, and I'm not a revengeful person because those guys at Phillipe are so far in my rearview mirror, I can't see them. But everybody stopped going to Phillipe and started coming to me. And they said, let's support the founder. And it got in the press and people realized what happened was wrong. And with Robert, who also has a huge following, and David, our highest projections there were like 6 million a year, because it's in FIDI. It's right by the Brooklyn Bridge, not in the greatest location, but the building is beautiful. It's the Beaux Arts building. It's a landmark. We jumped to $12 million in sales, and the place exploded, and the dumplings became the biggest hit. The pastrami dumplings and the Reuben and the bacon cheeseburger and the lamb gyro, French onion soup dumplings became like 30% of our sales, where that was a big risk because we could have confused the hell out of our customers. And it became a huge success. And with that said, pushing fast forward, COVID hit us like everybody else. And when COVID hit us, we did everything else. We shut down in March 2020. But what we did at that point, John, is I wanted to make sure I could talk to my grandkids one day and tell them what I did during the pandemic of 2020. And what I did with my partners, Robert and David, we sat back and we basically started donating all the food and meals that we had to the hospitals around us, preferably New York Presbyterian, because they were very supportive of us. And we started sending meals of like 20, 30 persons twice a day to the emergency room. So everybody can have a lobster or steak, we even sent them wine. And then what happened was they started putting these big things of thank you on Instagram. The New York Post picked up on it, and they called us hero of the day, which we were not. We're just slinging food. The real heroes are the ones that we're serving, the healthcare heroes. And make a long story short, it exploded to every hospital starting to call us. And what I did was I went to Cisco Foods and Junior's Cheesecake and 4-5 Coffee and Forever Young Wine and Boss Water. And I said to them, hey, guys, I need donations. And actually a couple of them started calling me before I called them. Hey, I read this thing in the Post. How can we help? And people were calling us, hey, do you have a GoFundMe page? I'm like, no. I don't want a GoFundMe page. I don't believe in GoFundMe pages for stuff like this because we're all hurting. But what I did is I had the big boys like Cisco, multi-billion-dollar companies. They were donating thousands and thousands and thousands of pounds of chicken, shrimp, produce, packaging. Junior's Cheesecake sent me 3,000 cakes. Voss Water sent me thousands of cases of water. I filled up a whole 5,000-foot restaurant with donated products. And every night we had 3 to 5 SUVs because we couldn't deliver it. It was so big. 3 to 5 SUVs every night that we would load up, and they would shoot out to hospitals. So we did 16 hospitals, 3 police departments, and even a nursing home on Mother's Day. And that, even though I did the largest COVID deals in business, that is going to be something that's going to be true and dear to my heart of my success. Those are my success stories during COVID, is what we did for all these hospital workers. And to this day, it keeps coming back to us. Like we see these healthcare workers, or we see people coming in and say, hey, you know what, we see it online. We're going to support this restaurant because you know what, when everybody was hiding under the covers, or when all the big leaders of our restaurant industry that have $2 billion market caps and $105 million of cash on hand selling burgers, without naming names, you could figure it out. They were the first to shut down, the first to lay off, and they're first with their hands out for PPP. And then meanwhile, mom and pop in Brooklyn can't get 100 grand, but these guys have their hands out. And guess what? If I had 186 burger joints like they do, I would have kept them all open. I would have told my public investors and say, hey, we're going to lose 50 million this year because we're going to keep these restaurants open and we're going to feed every hospital in those zip codes. And we're going to do it on the arm. And that's what we're going to do. And I'll tell you, if they had ever done that instead of reaching their hands out for $10 million in funds from the government, I believe that 50 million loss would have equaled another $1 billion in market cap, because people love to support companies that when everybody's down and out, the companies that step up and take care of the ones in need, or the ones that are out in the forefront. I mean, they're healthcare heroes.
Now, listen, I think what you did was amazing, and it's so weird. Everyone did different things during the pandemic, and what you did to rally all those amazing brands and to take it on yourself is tremendous.
And now with the Brooklyn Dumpling Shop, what happened was, John, not to cut you off, towards the end of 2019, I started coming up because the dumplings were on fire. Everybody was buying these dumplings. It was just crazy. I said, I went to my partners. I said, I want to do a 2-ounce sandwich shop. They said, what? I said, yeah, I want to do peanut butter and jelly. I want to do bacon cheeseburger, turkey club. And they're like, I want to do a dumpling shop. but I want it to be all traditional sandwiches. And they say, bro, 7 out of 10 restaurants in QSR, quick service, fail. And I said, but I have another concept that I want to bring back. It's called the automat. And I believe if you listen to the history of the automat, it was created in 1895. It exploded after the Spanish flu. And this is before COVID. And I did it for economics and efficiency reasons. I said, if we're doing driverless cars, it's time to bring the automat back, because technology failed the automat in the mid 70s when there were no dollar bill receivers. There were no credit card processing on these vending machines. And then, why not just go to Burger King or McDonald's and be in and out in 3 minutes? And this is where automats fell out of favor. Hence, Burger King bought the last 15 leases of Horn and Hardart, and the automat was just dead. I said, well, you know what? Let's bring it back and let's have it controlled by the consumer smartphone. And we'll do half the restaurant glass kitchen, so we keep it personal, and half the restaurant an automat where you will engage with the automat, not with our staff. This way we can shrink the payroll from the industry average of 30% to 15 to 20%. And that extra 15 to 20 points that drops to the bottom line, even 10 points, will keep a lot of these restaurants open instead of closing. Hence, we created the model. We signed our lease in January 2020. We were all excited, ready to go. And boom, I start hearing this thing about COVID. And then COVID shut it down. We had already signed our lease. So what came about after that was I had already had 500 square feet on the corner of St. Mark's and First, and that was going to be our flagship restaurant. Immediately, I went back to the landlord and I said, I want to take the store next door, which is another 500 feet, but I don't want to pay $8,000. I want to pay $2,000. And he made the deal. For the next 4 years, I'm paying $2,000 and then $3,500 and then $5,000 in year 7. And I said, wow, so there is a silver lining here. There are opportunities. I started, as I'm doing all philanthropy, I'm understanding that there's a business silver lining here. So I jumped my store to 1,000 square feet. I started building the technology with Panasonic. We created the automat. And then what happened was the papers started getting a part of it. Even during COVID, they started filming it and picturing it and understanding what I'm doing here. And it got so much press during COVID that they started saying it's the new COVID model. But truth be told, the only thing that I added to it was a UV light. But this was all created before COVID. And make a long story short, Jonathan, we opened in May 21 because, there was no reason to open sooner than that. The landlord was very supportive. And before that, we had already contracted 90 franchises, even before we opened store 1. That never happened in the history of restaurants. No other franchise has ever done that. Even sold 1 restaurant before proof of concept of a minimum of 2 years. We sold about 75 to 90 were in contract. Out of that 90, 50 were already in the bank before we even opened. Now we're about 190 franchises in contract or sold with a company called FranceSmart. And it's been unbelievable. It's like, I feel like I'm kind of like a Forrest Gump here, because after being in such low depths with what happened to me in 14
but instead of the chocolates, you have the dumplings, man. You're bringing the dumpling box.
Like Dan Rose said in one of the interviews, is like, this guy is the Willy Wonka of dumplings. I was like, oh, I don't know, is that a compliment? He goes, yeah. He goes, you're the Willy Wonka of dumplings. So the dumpling shop is just exploding. We also did a contract with Walmart. We're going to be in a couple of thousand Walmarts starting in January. And you know what? Like I said, I look back on all the adversity I experienced, and I'm not going to say I'm going to say my family and I, because my family were right there with me. It really feels good. And I don't think I could have done it if I didn't experience such failure.
Well, listen, I feel good for you. You're a great person. I've gotten to know you. And listen, what I love about you is you go with the flow, right? Like, nothing is a straight line, and you live that. And I want to thank you for being on the show. I know the audience is going to love this. What great stories. And you're tangible. They can come visit you at your stores, Brooklyn Chophouse, Brooklyn Dumpling Shops. Now Pappas, you're sitting behind. I see a wire coming out of your head. It's because you're sitting at a construction site building a new restaurant. I want to thank you so much. And I can't tell you how much I appreciate you being on.
Thank you for having me. As my architect is giving me an evil eye that I better get off this phone. He has 100 questions for me. At Pappas, correct. I'm bringing it back to Greenwich Village. But yeah, thank you for having me on.
All right. Well, thank you so much.